The Ghost on the Wind, a story of Roanoke. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, before the first tobacco ship sailed from Jamestown, there was a dream. It was an English dream, born in the gilded, ambitious court of Queen Elizabeth I, a dream of a foothold in the vast, unknown continent they called Virginia. It was a dream of empire, of wealth, of a new beginning. But it would become America's first and most enduring ghost story. The dream would end not with a bang, but with a whisper, a single cryptic word carved into a wooden post: CROATOAN. This is the true story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, a tale of hope, desperation, and a disappearance so total it has haunted the edges of American history for over 4 centuries. Part 1. The Vision of a New World. Our story begins not in the humid marshlands of the New World, but in the heart of London in the late 16th century. England was an island nation with a chip on its shoulder. The Spanish Empire, fat with the gold and silver of the Aztecs and Incas, dominated the Americas. Their galleons laden with treasure were the envy and the target of every English sea dog. Queen Elizabeth I, the shrewd and formidable Virgin Queen, knew that to challenge Spain, England needed more than just pirates and privateers. It needed a permanent base in the New World, a place to repair ships, a launching point for raids, and a source of its own unimaginable riches. Enter Sir Walter Raleigh. He was the quintessential Elizabethan man, a poet, a soldier, a courtier, and a relentless visionary. He was handsome, charming, and a favorite of the Queen, who had granted him a royal charter to colonize the lands north of Spanish Florida. Raleigh, though he would never set foot in North America himself, poured his fortune and his soul into this venture. In 1584, he dispatched a reconnaissance mission. The ships, captained by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, made landfall on the outer banks of modern-day North Carolina. What they found was a paradise. The air, they reported, was as if we had been in the midst of some delicate garden abounding with all kinds of odoriferous flowers. The native people, the Algonquin-speaking CROATOAN, were the most gentle, loving, and faithful, void of all guile and treason. The explorers returned to England with 2 willing native ambassadors, Montejo and Wanchese, and tales of a land overflowing with bounty. Raleigh was ecstatic. He named the entire region Virginia in honor of his queen. The stage was set. The first attempt at a colony, in 1585, was a military-style expedition of 107 men under the command of the hot-tempered Sir Richard Grenville and the stern Governor Ralph Lane. They built a small fort on the north end of Roanoke Island. But this was no paradise. The men were soldiers, not farmers. They had come for gold, not to till the soil. Their relationship with the CROATOAN, initially friendly, quickly soured. The English demanded food and resources, and their arrogance, combined with the diseases they unknowingly carried, bred resentment. The local chief, Wingina, began to see the colonists not as guests, but as a threat. The conflict culminated in a brutal English preemptive strike. Governor Lane and his men attacked Wingina's village, killing the chief and many of his people. The act forever poisoned the well of trust between the English and the local tribes. By the time Sir Francis Drake sailed by on his way back from raiding the Spanish Caribbean, the colonists were starving and desperate. They abandoned the fort and sailed home with Drake, leaving a scar on the land and in the memory of its people. Part 2. The City of Raleigh. Raleigh was undeterred by the failure. He realized his mistake. A military outpost could not survive. To truly take root, a colony needed families. It needed men and women and children who had a stake in the land, who were there to build homes, not just find gold. This new venture would be called the City of Raleigh. It would be led by a different kind of man, John White. White was an artist and a gentleman, not a soldier. He had been on the previous expedition, but his role was to document the new world, its people, its flora and fauna. His watercolors from that time are a priceless, beautiful window into a world that was about to vanish. More importantly, he was a family man. His own daughter, Eleanor, and her husband, Ananias Dare, were among the 117 people who signed on. Eleanor was pregnant. The plan was different this time. They would not return to the soured ground of Roanoke. Their destination was the Chesapeake Bay, further north, with its deep harbors and more fertile land. In May of 1587, 3 ships set sail. Among the colonists were farmers, craftsmen, and 17 women. The journey was arduous but filled with hope. They carried with them the seeds of a New England. But their hope was soon betrayed by the ship's pilot, Simon Fernandez. A Portuguese navigator with a shadowy reputation, Fernandez was anxious to leave the colonists and get back to the profitable business of privateering against the Spanish. Against John White's furious protests, Fernandez refused to sail on to the Chesapeake, claiming the season was too late. He forced the 117 men, women, and children ashore at the one place they were supposed to avoid, Roanoke Island. They were stranded. The fort from the 1585 expedition was overgrown, the houses dismantled. The mood was grim. They were in the wrong place, with insufficient supplies, and surrounded by native peoples who had every reason to hate them. The local tribe, now led by the hardened Wanchese, one of the 2 who had traveled to England and returned with a deep distrust of the English, was openly hostile. Soon after their arrival, a colonist named George Hoe was found dead, riddled with 16 arrows while fishing alone. Fear gripped the small community. Yet amidst the terror, there was a moment of profound hope. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia. She was the first English child born in the New World, a symbol of their fragile new beginning. But symbols couldn't feed them. Winter was approaching, and their supplies were dangerously low. The colonists realized that without a resupply from England, they would not survive. They had to send someone back. The choice was obvious and agonizing. Their governor, John White. He refused. He had promised to stay. He would not abandon his people, his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, Virginia. But the colonists were desperate. They formally petitioned him, insisting he was the only one Raleigh would listen to, the only one who could guarantee a relief mission. Reluctantly, with the heaviest of hearts, he agreed. He promised he would return by the following spring. As his ship pulled away from the shore at the end of August 1587, he watched the small figures of his family and his colony shrink against the vast, indifferent wilderness. It was the last time he or any European would ever see them again.
Part 3. The Silent Years. John White arrived in England in November, only to find a nation in crisis. All of Europe was bracing for war. King Philip II of Spain, furious at years of English piracy and Protestant defiance, had assembled the largest naval fleet the world had ever seen, the Spanish Armada. Its mission was to invade and conquer England. Every available ship, Every able-bodied sailor was conscripted for the defense of the realm. There were no ships for Virginia. White's pleas were drowned out by the drums of war. He petitioned the Queen, he begged Raleigh, but no one could spare a vessel. The fate of 116 Englishmen, women, and a small child across the ocean was a footnote in a struggle for national survival. In the summer of 1588, the invincible Armada was defeated by the smaller, nimbler English fleet and a Protestant wind that scattered their ships. England erupted in celebration, but for John White, the nightmare continued. The war with Spain dragged on, and the seas remained a battleground. He managed to secure passage on 2 small privateering vessels in 1589, but the greedy captains were more interested in chasing Spanish prize ships than sailing to Roanoke. They got into a bloody fight off the coast of France and limped back to England, defeated. 1 year turned into 2. 2 turned into 3. 3 agonizing years passed. Every sunrise must have brought a fresh wave of torment for White. He was a governor who had left his people, a father who had left his child, a grandfather who had left his infant granddaughter to an unknown fate thousands of miles away. Part 4. The Return to Silence. Finally, in 1590, White secured passage on another privateering expedition. He was a passenger, his presence tolerated by a captain who had no real interest in the old colony. The journey was long and harrowing. As they approached the coast of North Carolina, they saw a column of smoke rising from the direction of Roanoke Island. White's heart leapt. For 3 years he had imagined this moment. He believed it was a signal from the colonists, a sign that they had survived. On the evening of August 17th, the eve of his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, they anchored off the coast. The sailors rowed towards the island, their trumpets sounding, singing familiar English songs, hoping for an answer from the darkness. Only a profound, unnerving silence replied. The next morning, August 18th, they went to shore. The smoke they had seen was just a forest fire. They walked towards the site of the settlement. The first thing White noticed was that the area was fortified. The colonists had enclosed the settlement with a high palisade or defensive wall made of large tree trunks. It looked as though they had prepared for an attack. But as he entered the enclosure, a chilling mystery began to unfold. There were no bodies. There were no bones. There were no signs of a battle or a struggle. The houses inside the palisade had been neatly dismantled and taken down, not burned or destroyed. It was as if the entire town had been packed up and moved. Heavy iron bars, pieces of pig iron, and cannons were left scattered and overgrown with weeds, too heavy to carry. It was an evacuation, not a massacre.
Then he saw it. Carved into one of the main posts of the palisade, in clear, bold letters, was a single word: CROATOAN. White stared at the carving. His mind raced. Before he had left 3 years prior, they had agreed upon a secret code. If the colonists had to leave Roanoke, they would carve their destination into a tree or a post. If they were in distress or had been forced to leave, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the name. White searched frantically. There was no cross. This was not a site of disaster. It was a message. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, modern-day Hatteras Island, about 50 miles south. It was the home of Manteo, their trusted native ally, who had been baptized and named Lord of Roanoke before White's departure. The message seemed clear. The colonists had moved to CROATOAN Island to live with Manteo's people. A surge of relief and hope washed over John White. They were alive. His family was alive. They just had to get to them. He rushed back to the ship, urging the captain to set sail for CROATOAN immediately. But the New World's unforgiving nature intervened. a powerful storm, a classic Outer Banks hurricane, began to brew. The winds howled, and the sea churned into a violent froth. The ship's main anchor cable snapped, and they nearly wrecked on the shoals. The crew, already on edge, refused to go on. They had lost their anchor, the weather was turning deadly, and their privateering mission was at risk. They would not endanger the ship and their lives for what they saw as a fool's errand. They overruled the captain and the desperate governor. They turned the ship around and set a course for the Caribbean. John White stood on the deck, watching the shores of Virginia and any hope of ever seeing his family again disappear into the storm. He would never have the money or the means to return. He died years later in Ireland, a broken man, haunted by the image of a deserted settlement and a single cryptic word.
Epilogue: The Echoes of a Lost Colony. The 117 settlers of the Roanoke colony, including the child Virginia Dare, vanished from the pages of history. They were absorbed into the silence of the American continent. For over 400 years, the question has lingered: what happened to the lost colony? No single answer is certain, but the clues, the context, and modern archaeology point towards one dominant theory: the assimilation theory. This is the most widely accepted theory among historians today. Guided by the CROATOAN carving and the lack of a distress signal, it posits that the colonists, facing starvation and hostility, willingly moved south to live with Manteo's people on CROATOAN Island. They likely intermarried, adopted native customs, and slowly, over generations, were absorbed into the CROATOAN tribe. Later English explorers in the 17th century, including the Jamestown settlers, heard persistent rumors from inland tribes about people who looked like them, people with light-colored eyes and hair, who lived in two-story stone houses, and who claimed to be descended from the Roanoke settlers. The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, many of whom have English surnames from the lost colonists' roster, have long held this as a core part of their oral tradition. Recent archaeological digs on Hatteras Island have uncovered 16th century English artifacts mixed in with native settlements, lending powerful physical evidence to this theory. Other theories, though less likely, persist. The Spanish theory. Some believe the colonists were wiped out by a Spanish military patrol sent from their Florida base to eliminate the English threat. It's a plausible motive, but the meticulous Spanish, who kept records of everything, have no account of such an attack. Nor does it explain the dismantled houses and the clear CROATOAN message. The massacre theory. Perhaps they were attacked and killed by Wanchise's tribe or another hostile group. While certainly possible, it fails to account for the lack of bodies and the orderly nature of the departure. It is possible, however, that a portion of the colonists attempted to move inland and met a violent end, while the rest went to CROATOAN. The lost at sea theory. A desperate attempt to sail back to England in a small boat they built would have ended in certain disaster. But again, this is pure speculation with no evidence. The story of Roanoke is more than just an unsolved mystery. It is a humbling lesson from the dawn of American history. It reminds us that the continent was not an empty slate waiting to be written upon, but a complex world already full of its own people, politics, and power. The line between survival and oblivion for the first European settlers was razor thin, and the Roanoke colonists simply fell on the wrong side of it. They were not mythical figures, but real people. Ananias Dare, the bricklayer, Eleanor White, the young mother, and little Virginia, the child who became a legend. Their dream of a new city died, but their story lives on, a ghost on the wind, forever whispering a single,
haunting word from the shores of the New World. CROATOAN.